Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Mr. Stanier's Chess Academy. This is the beginner's course, lesson 2. So if you remember last time, we looked at how the rooks moved, how the bishops moved, and how the queens moved. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at our final 3 pieces and how they move. We're going to look at how the pawn moves. We're going to look at how the knight, or the horse you might call it, moves. And we're going to look at how the king moves, the importance of the king. We're also going to think about the different value of the pieces, the different strategic value of the pieces. So we're going to start first of all with the pawn, the humble pawn. Now, the pawn can only move forward. It can never retreat. It has to keep charging towards the enemy no matter what. Because this represents sort of infantry in battle, those are foot soldiers, it moves very slowly as well. So a pawn can only move one place forward. And there it goes, all the way up. Okay, so this pawn wants to move that, one place forward, all the way. There we go. So that's how a pawn moves. Now, on the pawn's first move, the pawn can actually get off to a flying start because it's so keen to get into battle. So on a pawn's first move, and its first move only, it can move 2 places. And then afterwards, move 1 place forward. Okay, so any pawn, so if I move this pawn for the first move, I can move it to here. This pawn, I can move it to here. This pawn, I can move it to here. On this pawn's next go, I can't move it to here because it's not its first move. It can only go 1 more space forward. Okay, so this pawn here can only go 1 space forward. This pawn here can only go 1 space forward. Okay, so 2 spaces on its first move and 1 space afterwards. On the first move, you don't want to go 2 spaces. If you just want to go to just 1, that's fine as well. So on its first move, a pawn can go 1 space, or it can go 2 spaces. Now, if white does this move, and then black does this move its pawn 2 spaces forward, the next move for white cannot capture this piece straight ahead of it. You might think you could, because rooks could, couldn't they? But pawns can't. Okay, pawns can only take diagonally sideways. So at the moment, this pawn is blocked. It can't move. It can't go anywhere. Also, black's pawn, it's blocked. It can't move. It can't go anywhere. So, if white now did... Sorry, I'll put that pawn back there. If white now did this move, what black could do the next go is it could capture this pawn here because it can capture diagonally. Okay, so if white again were to move this pawn here, then black could capture it diagonally. But if you look here, this pawn here can now capture this pawn. Or if it wanted to, it could move here, or it can move here. But we would probably want to capture that pawn there. So pawns can go 1 step forward or 2 steps on their first move and their first move only. They can only take diagonally. Now the final thing that you need to know about the pawn for now is it has a special power. And this special power is that if a pawn manages to get to the back rank, so it manages to get to the 8th rank, so if it keeps going all the way up the board, and then finally, let's get these pieces out of the way, and finally it gets this square here, it can turn into any other piece it likes. Now, as we talked about in the last lesson, the most powerful piece on the board, but not the most important, but most powerful, is the queen. So most players choose to turn their pawn into a queen. And you can see how this will completely change your chances to win a game. So pawns, even though you might think they're not very powerful, they can only move one space forward, they can only take diagonally, which is a little bit annoying. Actually, if you look after them and you help them get all the way to the end of the board, they can become one of your most powerful pieces. So that is the pawn. Now, the next piece we're going to look at is the knight, or the horsey. Now, the knight, if we just clear the board, the knight moves in a very strange way. Now, when I was taught this as a young child, and it's a way that always stuck with me, it moves in a pattern which is 1, 2, and across. So this knight here can move 1, 2, and across. But it could also move 1, 2, and across. It could also move 1, 2, and across. Could also move 1, 2, and across, and so on. 1, 2, and across, 1, 2, and across, 1, 2, and across. Other people like to see this shape as an L shape. So there's an upside down L. We can move this square here, 1, 2, and across, 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 1, 2, and across. So this makes the knight a very, very versatile piece. And I'll let you into a little secret, it's actually my wife's favourite piece on the chessboard. And it can dance around the board very happily. Now, the other thing you need to know about a knight is that it can jump over pieces as well. So this is the knight's starting position in the game, and it has 3 pawns in front of it here. Now, from this position, the knight could go 1, 2, and across to here, or 1, 2, and across to here, or 1, 2, and across to here. So you might think, well, actually, no, it shouldn't be able to go 1, 2, and across here, because you'll hit this pawn, and just with the other pieces, if you can't take your own pieces. But knights can jump over pieces. So this knight can happily go to f3 because it can jump over this pawn here. Okay. Now, when you jump over a piece, it doesn't mean you take it. So if we have a situation here where we have 2 pawns, a pawn on f4 and a pawn on e5, this knight, if it went 1, 2, and across, it would jump over this black pawn, but land on this one. So the pawn that it lands on is the one that it captures. So if, for example, there was a rook here, then the knight would land there and take that. Okay, so 1, 2, and across, 1, 2, and across, 1, 2, and across, 1, 2, and across. Or you can go across 1, 2, but it's that 1, 2, and across, 1, 2, and across is the key thing to remember. And in my head, whenever I look at a knight in Academy, I always think 1, 2, and across. So that's the pawn and the knight. So now I'd like to show you the final piece and the most important piece on the board, and that is the king. Now the king, remember, starts not on its own colour, because the queen starts on her own colour. So the white king starts on the black square at the back, and the black king starts on the white square at the back. Now the king moves the same way as the queen, but can only move 1 space. So this king, on e1, can move to d1, can move to d2, can move to e2, can move to f2, and can move to f1. And the black king can only move 1 square in any of these directions. So this means that the king moves nice and regally, nice and royally, nice and slowly. And that's how the king moves. Now, the king is the most important piece on the board. And the whole purpose of the game of chess is to capture your enemy's king. Let's imagine that we play a game of chess and we have a king and 2 rooks against an enemy king here. Now, what beginners often do is they often just try and take the opponent's king. So you might get situations like this. So white might put their rook there. Black might make a mistake and move their rook here. And then white takes the king. Oh, I've won the game of chess. But I'm afraid it doesn't really work like that, because you can never put the king in danger. So if white moves the rook here, then any move the king takes along this 7th rank will mean it gets taken, which isn't allowed. So black is not allowed to move their king here, here, or here. They have to move their king here or here. Okay? So I'll just show you another example of that. If white move their rooks here, the king can't move onto any of this file, any of the D file, because they'll be taken straight away. So it's not allowed. So the king can only move here, here, or here. Now, when white plays a move here and says, next go, if you don't do something, I'm going to take you, then white signifies this to its opponent by saying the word check. So that means I'm going to take your king next move, but you can move it out of the way. So black can move their king here. White might go there. Check again. Black moves here. White might go there. Check again. Black can move here, for example, d7. If we had a knight, so the knight might move here. 1, 2, and across. Oh, next go I'm going to take your king. Check. So black has to move the king. If black had another piece on the board, so say we've got a bishop here, for example, because white said check, I can take your king next go, black has to move the king. They can't move the bishop unless the bishop would take the knight, because black has to make its king safe. Okay, so the only move that black could do is to move the king out of the way. The king can't move here because the rook will take it next go. Okay, so that's this idea of check. Now, I'm going to talk to you now about the end of the game. So the end of the game is when you capture your opponent's king. And this is known as checkmate. So again, let's imagine we played a game and we've just got 2 rooks and a king left. If white played this rook here, then as we know, black can't move onto this 7th row because it would be in check, so that's not allowed. So it has to go either here or here. So let's say the king's going to go to f8. And if white moves the rook down here, then you'll see that the king is in check. Has to move out the way. Can't move here because this rook will still be able to take it. But can't move here either because we have this rook here. So we can see that this king, in any square that it chooses to move to, will be taken next move. And that is known as checkmate, because the king can't move without being taken the next move. Let's have a look at another example of that. So So if the white king, for example, decided to move here to h5, and then the black king came down here, it's check because the next move the black queen can take the king, but the queen can go there next go, can go there next go, can go there next go, go there next go. So there's actually nowhere the king can move without being taken by the queen. You might think, but Mr. Stanier, the king could take the queen. But if the king takes the queen, the king can take the king next go. So this again is another example of checkmate. The king is going to be taken next go, and there's no square that he can go to, which will mean that he's safe. So this is checkmate. Let me show you one more example. It's a very important concept. It's very so vital that you understand. Let's have a look at this situation here. So it's white's move, and white moves its rook down here. It's check, but look, the king can't move onto any of these squares because the pawns are blocking him. And if he goes there, the rook will take him. If he goes here, the rook will take him. So again, this is checkmate. If that pawn had moved there, and the rook comes down here and goes check, this isn't checkmate because the king could move here. Or alternatively, it wouldn't be checkmate because the queen can come here and block the rook. So we'll talk about this idea of checkmate a little bit more in the future, but that's the aim of the game, to destroy your opponent's pieces and to get your opponent checkmate. Now, each of your pieces has got a strategic value. So we have the basic fundamental piece, and that is a pawn. And these pawns, let's say they're worth 1 point. Now, if you have a bishop is worth the same as 3 pawns. Okay, so a bishop is worth 3 points. A knight is also worth 3 points, so it's the same value as 3 pawns. A rook, because it can move so far and so fast, is actually a little bit more important than a bishop or a knight. So a rook is worth 5 points. It's worth 5 pawns. And a queen, the most powerful and the most important piece on the board, she is actually worth 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pawns, worth 9 points. Now, at this stage in the game, it's just important you remember these numbers. Okay, a pawn is worth 1, a bishop is worth 3, a knight is worth 3, a rook is worth 5, and a queen is worth 9. So if you're in a situation in a chess game where so it's been a particularly brutal match, and only these pieces are left on the board. You might think, well, who's got the best opportunity to win here? Well, if we have a look at the pieces, so we've got the bishop, which is 3 points. We've got the knight, which is 3 points. And we have the pawns, which is another 3, so that's 9 in total. Playing against black, that's got a rook, which is 5 points. And pawns that are worth 1 point. So black's got 9 points as well. So even though even though they have different pieces, actually both sides have got an equal chance of winning from this position. But if we had, say, this position, white on 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points, and black on just 5, 6 points. So from this position, it looks like black's going to lose. So it's a good way to judge what your position is in the game. You might say, well, hang on a second, Mr. Stanier, what about the kings? You haven't counted the kings. Well, remember, if the enemy takes the king, then you've lost the game. So the kings are priceless. So I'll set a few exercises to help you get your head around some of these concepts. So have a go at them, and please email me to let me know that you've completed them. And in the next session, we'll start beginning to look at how to play a full game of chess. Thank you for all your hard work so far, and keep me up to date with how you're doing.